welcome everybody. We're going to talk about a little React using ECMAScript 6. First, want to get some demographic stuff come out of the way. Who here has never used React ever? Period. No shit. Okay. Okay. Who here has used some React? Okay. In production? Okay. Who here has used actually the new syntax, the ES6 syntax? All right, so this will be new for everyone. The rest of you can just leave. I'm just kidding. Cool. So yeah, I'm Brian Holt. Super stoked to be talking at Fluent again. A little bit about myself. I was, as of 2 weeks ago, at Reddit. That's probably what you all signed up for, was to hear some jackass from Reddit talk. Sorry, he's gone. I'm currently at Netflix. Just moved to San Francisco from Utah. Anyone from Utah in here? Yeah, you guys are awesome. You're all cool too. So, cool. You can tweet at me. I will be checking for questions during the talk. So if you want to ask me a question and do not want to make it to the mic, please just tweet at me. I'll try and answer those a couple times. Otherwise, feel free to interrupt me, raise your hand, just walk straight up to the microphone. I'll have some defined question times as well, but if you have a burning question that's pertinent to what we're talking about, please just, come up here to the microphone, let's chat. Cool. So what is React? It's kind of a confusing name. People kind of confuse it with RxJS, reactive programming. And while it lends itself to reactive programming, it's not necessarily reactive programming. It's kind of a poor name, in my opinion, but it's also an awesome piece of technology. So, open source, developed by Facebook, used a lot on Instagram and Facebook.com. Then more widely adopted like Khan Academy. Reddit was a pretty early adopter. Some of those other companies. It's a view layer. So when you think of Angular, you think of Ember. These are kind of the full client stack for you. They take care of all of your concerns, marshaling the data, fetching the data, kind of models and validations, and as well as the view layer. React just doesn't care. Yeah, I mean, it just presents your data in whatever way you tell it to do. Meaning you can use it with Backbone, but don't. Cool. So its greatest contribution to the JS landscape is one-way data flow. I'm not going to say they obviously didn't invent it, right? But I would strongly assert that they popularized it and made it kind of a more well-known, great feature to the point where the Ember guys, or the Ember people and Angular people, decided that was worthwhile, and they're actually both kind of, I'm not going to say copying, but it's certainly to a certain point emulating in their next versions this really strong feature of React. A lot of people, when they talk about React, they talk about this cool feature called the virtual DOM, right? When you hear React, how many just think virtual DOM? It's first 10 words in your head. I know most of you are lying. It's usually one of the first things that comes up, and it's cool. It's a really cool idea. This idea that they kind of generate your DOM tree, they keep it all in JavaScript memory, and then they diff the difference between what's actually in the DOM and what's in memory, and then they just update the parts that need to be updated. This is really efficient. It sounds really inefficient, but it actually is efficient because the DOM is so inefficient, right? Doing things like repaints and layers and adding and destroying. Yeah, that's the most inefficient part. So people like to bring that up about React. And I would strongly assert that it makes React feasible, not desirable. It's not the reason to use React. There's plenty of other things you can do that are performant, and that's not really what we're going to concentrate on here. So state is the enemy of a maintainable app. I'm sure someone said that, but I couldn't find the quote, so I decided that Batman said it. Yeah. Let's actually go back to this slide. So state, right? That's actually what makes maintaining client-side apps really, really hard. Something changed. I maintained a fairly large Angular app while I was at Reddit, and don't get me wrong, like Angular's fine. It was my own invention of why that app was super hard to maintain, but it maintained a lot of state that was very hard to discern how it was getting modified. So if I was maintaining my app and like things were going awry and I was trying to debug where it was going awry, it could have been anywhere in the app. And that's why Batman doesn't like state. So we're going to get into kind of more nuts and bolts of what is in React. So state versus props. React has two concepts of data access in a component, state and props. And this will become very concrete in a sec because you're going to see a lot of this.state and this.props. And what Batman says is he says avoid using state as much as possible, use props as much as you can. Props are things that are passed down from children to parents and are immutable. Now, for those of you who like functional programming, immutable should be music to your ears, because immutable things can't really be, like, it's really hard to make immutable things into bugs, right? Because they don't change. They can't change. State are kept in the same component, but can only be modified inside the same component. This kind of limited scoping to state makes it less evil, but still like that much evil. So. One-way data flow. So we talked a little bit about this. React views are made out of components, which are made out of components, which are made out of components. Turtles all the way down for those of you who read it. That's a good question. How many of you read it? Are on Reddit? Okay, I know there's more of you. I know. How many of you are on Netflix? Okay, cool. About the same people. So yeah, data only flows from the parents to the children, and it does not flow in the other direction. Limiting yourself to this, again, when you find problems, like if you have state in a parent component and these children has children, you know that the problem that with this changing data has to be in that parent component and it can't be in the children, right? Because the data doesn't flow back up, it only flows down. But sometimes you have children that need to inform parents that things are happening, right? So for example, if you have a parent form component and you have a child like button component that needs to inform the parent something changed, what you do is you pass down a callback. There are other ways to do it, but the way we're going to talk about today is you're going to pass down a callback so that every time that button gets fired, it says, hey, parent, something happened. Now go deal with your own problems. It's a really powerful pattern, and again, we're going to start writing code here in a little bit that'll make this more concrete for you. Yeah. What really drove this home for me is I used to work on the Reddit e-commerce stuff, and so we rewrote the entire shopping cart experience in React. It was our first kind of big app. Of course, being the responsible developer, I finished the app and then immediately went on vacation so I didn't have to deal with the problems. Yeah, I would highly suggest that to everyone. But it broke, obviously. And so I was, in the middle of a cruise ship, drinking Mai Tais, and I kind of left my fellow coworkers out kind of high and dry. They had to fix the problem, and it was, losing money, like a real problem. So what they ended up doing is they, kind of followed the data stream through the React app, and they were able to find the problem without even emailing me. It was a backend developer that actually ended up doing it, so it wasn't that hard. Sorry, this is backend developers in the crowd. Little sorry about that. Okay. Yeah, but they fixed it. Okay. So what do I do with data if React just doesn't care about it, right? You got to do marshalling the data around, and React is only minimally helpful about it. Well, it's kind of up to you. And that's kind of one of the beautiful points about React is it's a component of your app that doesn't enforce its opinion on other pieces of your app. One of the reasons that we actually originally chose React is that if you have an Angular app, I'm picking on Angular because that's the one I know the best, but this is true of many others. If you have Angular on your page, Angular kind of has to take over your page because it's really hard to play with Angular from outside Angular. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's hard. With React, it's actually pretty simple. It's pretty simple to just throw like one widget on there. And it's like, this is our React widget, but everything else is in something else. And then if you decide to move away from React, it's again pretty easy to get away from React. So all this to say is when you have to marshal your data around, it's kind of up to you how you handle it. This is kind of a flow of how I choose to do it. I start by using just props and state like I've told you. Like you have a root component that handles most of the data, and then it just marshals it down to its children. It works really well if it's a fairly simple app. Most of the things that we're building are kind of modular pieces that kind of manage their own destiny and don't really care what's happening around them. It's a really good use case for that. Now let's say you have, this form over here or this form over here. Actually, let's use the Facebook example. That's a really good one. So you have the notification bars at the top of Facebook, and it says you have 7 notifications, right? Now there's lots of things that you can do to affect that number, right? You can get another notification, which causes it to go up, or you can read one of the notifications and it causes it to go down. So there's multiple things that can affect this component, right? But they don't necessarily share the same parent. So that's when you're going to use something like an event emitter, right? We use event emitter 2, which is like one of the more well-known ones. You just fire off an event saying, hey, one notification read. That notification bar just says, oh, okay, listens for the event, takes it in, decrements that, and on you go. This is kind of the next step if you need more cross-component communications. Along those lines, though, is be very careful of trying to keep in sync state. That is like a huge no-no, and if you've ever tried to sync state, it's just always going to fall out of sync. It just always, guarantee you're going to screw it up. Because, I screw it up all the time. So, don't do it. So you need a single source of truth. That's what I'm getting at here. Okay. This is kind of brushing against my beard. Okay. So, if you need to share a lot of data or you have a big app, that's when you need to start talking about using Flux. We're not going to talk about Flux. I think it's overkill for anything but a bigger app. Personal opinion, there are people that use Flux even in small cases. I just think it complicates things more than they need to be complicated. And I guess the other thing is with Flux, Flux is a really pretty simple architecture, meaning there are libraries for it like Fluxer and Flux and lots of other Flux puns. But you don't really need them most of the time. They're pretty easy to just grow them yourself using an event emitter. So, and like I was saying earlier, don't shoehorn React into Angular or Backbone. It's possible, but a bad idea. There's lots of things you can do. I would argue that there are many things that you shouldn't do, and this is among them. If you're going to do it, use Backbone, but again, don't. Okay. Definitely not Angular. That's a bad idea. Okay, JSX. So, when we start talking about JSX, this offends people. So try not to get offended. Okay, so JSX is pretty much JavaScript, but you get to put HTML into your JavaScript. I'm waiting for someone to storm out of the room as I say things like, okay, no one's left yet. Cool. But just I probably would have left at this point. So JSX is not required, but it's pretty much required. Okay, so just use it. I don't know anyone, literally do not know anyone that's running an app in production that's not using at least one of the dialects of JSX. Whether that's ClojureScript, CoffeeScript, JSX, there's a lot of them that will target React. But in a nutshell, JSX, lets you write essentially HTML into your JavaScript. And it bothered me at first because I didn't want to add an extra build step. But we're going to use Babel because we're doing ES6 kind of fun stuff, and Babel just handles JSX natively. So you would really just not be using JSX just for the sake of not using JSX, which is, as we all know, very silly. Okay, so mashing together markup in JavaScript isn't that a bad idea? It's not, so thanks, Indiana Jones. Okay, mushing together concerns. A lot of us have worked on like Rails, Laravel, Django, MVC of some sort for the server, which is awesome. I highly encourage you to observe that paradigm on the server. It's just a mess on the client. I mean, in personal opinion here, it's not a request resolution kind of cycle for the most part on the client. What's much more common is you have components, right? Like you have like this little widget and you have this little widget and they fit together and they do things together and then you send all that data back off. That's kind of the natural flow. That's how they've been writing HTML since, Werner's-Lee started the internet, more or less. So that's why they kind of chose to eschew the traditional MV star architecture. It's because it ends up just being a huge mishmash of interdependencies that are really hard to discern, and I would even say often impossible to discern. So instead, it makes sense of things to think. Instead, it makes sense to think of things instead in terms of behaviors, right? Like clicking on a button, what does the button do? In terms of layouts, like what does this actually look at? Like if we feed this kind of data in, it'll look like these sorts of things. And again, we'll get more concrete with that here in just a sec. Okay, so before we move on to ES6, do you have any questions about Reactful type things? You can just yell them too. If I can hear you, I'll repeat the question. Okay, I think I hear crickets, literal crickets. Okay. ECMAScript 6. So how many of you were in here for Aaron and Axel's talk? Okay, so a good portion of you, but we'll be going over a lot of the same sorts of things, so hopefully they'll just feel more familiar. So ES6, for those who don't know, it's the latest revision of JavaScript. It's really cool. It's just starting now to get a lot of adoption and implementation, but in the meantime, we have something called Babel. Babel? Yeah, I'm going with Babel. It's a transpiler that takes your ES6, your new syntax JavaScript, and transpiles it into something a little easier for the browser to understand, also known as ES5. And the cool thing is that Babel also handle JSX. So we could use, that was supposed to be Traceur with a U. Anyway, so we could have used something like that, but then you have to do this like tango of getting JSX and Traceur to play nice together, which is non-trivial. So Babel just has it built in, so we're going to go ahead and jump on that. We're going to be covering like a pretty small surface area, but it's going to be very applicable surface area to React. Some of the tooling here, we're going to be using Gulp, simple build system. I'm not married to it, it's just one that's pretty simple. We're using Babel, talked about that. We're going to be using Browserify. Could have just as easy used Webpack. I chose Browserify because I already know how to use it a lot better. And we're going to be using Koa. Does anyone know what Koa is? Koa, raise a hand. Not a whole lot. How many of you know what Express is? Okay, so about everyone. It's done by the same guy, and it feels almost the same, except we're using generators for our middleware, which is another cool ES6 thing that we'll talk about when we get there. And we'll be using IO.js, which is JavaScript on the server, or the fork of Node if you're not familiar with it, but it doesn't matter, you can use Node too, I don't really care. Okay, so how many of you already cloned this repo? Yes, okay. I was worried I was going to have another crisis like the last guys did. So I'll leave this up for here just a second. Please go clone that, and please run an npm install once you have cloned it. How's the internet working? Yes? No? 0, right? Shit. Okay. I got 2 flash drives, which this is a lot of people for that, but why don't you just go ahead and start passing these around. Just if you don't need it, just pass it to someone else. Thank you. And there's only one zip file on there that you need, which is the ES6 React.zip. Yeah, and once you're done over here, pass it over to our friends over there. Any questions? Cool. See if anyone's asking me questions on Twitter. Nope. Cool. Okay, I'm going to pull this down since the internet doesn't seem to be working anyway. Yeah. No, we're not going to talk about unit testing today. So he asked me how do I approach unit testing, which I'm happy to talk a little bit about right now. How do I want to answer this question? So at Netflix, it's pretty haphazard. They do test the important parts, but it's still kind of an evolving idea. Where and Reddit was just non-existent until we got on our new projects. I'm a fan of like a minimal amount of testing, testing what's important in your infrastructure. Kind of like can't afford to fail kind of stuff. And then when things break in the future, then write tests to cover the things that break. Good question, though. Anyone else? Nope.
Do you use Jest for that?
What's that?
Do you use Jest, or do you
Yeah, he's asked me, do we use Jest? I have used Jest. My biggest problem with Jest, which is the Facebook testing framework, pairs nicely with React. I guess it pairs nicely with anything. There's nothing React specific in it. I like Jest, but they're on Jasmine 1.3, which really bothers me because Jasmine 2.0 got a lot better. So we use Mocha now just because I just have such a problem with Jasmine 1.3. Good question. Anyone else? Cool. So, we're going to be writing a whole lot of code today. So buckle up. Just kidding. All right, everything's super small. So, okay. So this is the project if you have it cloned. Is that like totally impossible to read on that left side? Whatever, it doesn't really. I'll just tell you what I'm going into. So, just to kind of tell you how the project is laid out. There's the completed directory. There is the empty directory. The completed directory will be. Sorry. The completed directory will be things like, or it'll just be the whole project already written. So if you need to cheat, if you need to like go over and see like how something is worked because you're falling behind a little bit, you can just check over in completed real quick, see what's going on. Empty, I've created all the files for you and linked everything up. There's a Gulp file already written in there, so you can jump in and ready to fly writing code with me. And then there's also, if you want to actually have like notes up here, and they're published in there as well on the speakersnote.md, right? And I'm just going to be following these, so if you want to follow that along too, that's totally cool. So, first thing we're going to do is we're going to get acquainted with some of the files we're going to be working with here. Just so it's not as much black magic, just only a little bit. So let's take a look at the Gulp file first. Readable, not readable, that color scheme. Good. In the back, yes, no? Cool. Right. So Gulp. If you're not familiar with Gulp, it deals with streams. It's not really important, but just designed to make things a little bit more simple. We're going to be using Browserify, which allows us to use common JS modules. We won't be using the ES6 modules just because they're kind of a pain to work with at this juncture in time. And then the other things we have, there's some other just bullshit in there that you don't really have to care about. And we're just packaging everything together, outputting it, and then we have a Gulp watch down here as well. So actually here in my terminal, I got 2 terminals up here. I'm just going to say Gulp watch and then just forget about it. Except I'm the completed one, being the empty one. So Gulp watch. If you don't have Gulp installed globally, I'll show you how to do that. You say node modules, node modules, Gulp, bin, Gulp, yeah, and then you have to say watch. Cool. So that'll work as well if you don't have Gulp installed globally, and you probably won't be able to get it on the Wi-Fi. So, cool. Any questions about that? No. Okay. Okay, let's go on and look at the index.html. Okay. Something pretty straightforward here. We're going to pull in Font Awesome, which is an icon font. We're going to pull in some style.css. I wrote the CSS for you because this is not a styling workshop. This is a JavaScript workshop. But you're welcome to just take a gander at it. It's in public CSS, style.css. It's a bunch of CSS. I hope no one was surprised by that. Okay. And then, it says not rendered lol. So if nothing's happening, it's going to say not rendered and make fun of you. I anticipated that the Wi-Fi would not be very good, so I rewrote the API client to use like local JSON files, because this happened to me last year and I was not going to let it happen again. So it's pretty simple. Instead of actually reaching out to the OMDB API, it just pulls in some JSON files and serves it back to you. So it should seem pretty seamless to you what it's actually doing. Or in other words, you don't have to care what's going on inside of it. It should just be a black box. Okay, and then the data that it's serving back to you is movies.json and netflix.json. So, cool. Base template, we're not going to look at this for a while, but as you can see, it's very simple. The only thing that changes is this little piece right here. And we'll be using this once we get into server-side rendering of React. Awesome. Cool. So again, you should not have to create any new files as we're going along here. Everything should be just ready for you to go. Feel free to gander at completed if you have questions, or stop me, because if you have a question, probably someone else has a question too. So this is not a workshop in code organization. As you can see, everything is just shoved together. And there are JS files in the JSX directory, which I only realized like 15 minutes ago. So don't emulate my code layout. But this was all done mostly so it would be pretty straightforward. All right, so whatever works for you might not work for you. Okay, so hopefully you have Node 12 or later, or IOJS or later. If you don't, you're going to have trouble at the end of this workshop. As long as you have Node 8, you should be able to follow along at least for the beginning, I think. You tell me. If it doesn't, then let me know. Okay. So we're going to start by looking at what the page looks like. Without writing any code. So there's a couple ways you can do this. I'm going to use HTTP server. Maybe I won't. There, stop that. Oh, that's right. Okay. Or not. Hold on. Okay, maybe I won't be using HTTP server. Actually. So this should work just as well if you just go in here and say open empty index.html. Cool. Let's make that bigger. So it should be making fun of you and say nothing's rendering. Hopefully most of you are able to get at least that far. Yeah? Cool. So let's go ahead and just jump right in. Let's go to JSX, index.jsx, okay? And we're just going to make like the most basic React component in the world. Okay, so you're going to say var React equals require React. Class app extends React.component render return and then you got to say module.exports equals app. Okay. So if you've done common.js before, it should look pretty familiar. I hope most of you have seen module.exports before, require, right? Not going to go into super amount of depth on that, but it's just JavaScript modules, right? So, yeah, requiring in React, and then that's the new ES6 class syntax, right? So it's a new class that we called app, and it extends the React component. Even if you haven't seen this particular version of that, I imagine many of you are familiar with maybe Java syntax or some of those other ones that have more classical type inheritance. It looks pretty similar to that. Okay? But something that kind of throws people for a loop is right here you have render, right? Like this doesn't look like an object literal, right? Most of us are used to doing render : function, right? That looks more familiar. Well, it's not the case here. That actually won't even work right now. One of the main goals of ES6 is to never write the word function ever again, which is awesome because I'm sick of typing those letters. So, yeah, you just don't have to write function anymore. You just put the parentheses and you're good to go. Something else you can't notice right now, but just to make you aware of it, if there was another function like, I don't know, do thing, you don't need this comma right here, right? Most of us are used to putting that comma there for object literals. You actually can't put the comma there. So, also, one less keystroke for the lazy web. Okay, cool. This is the most basic React component you can have. Every React component must have a render function. There's no two ways about that. I guess you could have maybe some sort of abstract thing, but eventually it has to have a render function. And that render function returns a React component. So this is the JSX that we've been talking about, right? You can just put your markup straight into with your JavaScripts, which is pretty cool. Okay, and then we're just exporting it here so we can import it somewhere else. Okay, so save that. Let's go look at client-app.jsx. Okay, let's see if I make sure I covered everything. Yep, cool. All right, this one's pretty short and sweet, and we will not have to touch this one again. So you're just going to say var react equals require. Whoa, that's not require. Okay, require react. Var app equals require ./index, which is we're just requiring in that same file that we were just modifying, right? Okay, and then we're going to say react.render, and then we're going to create a new instance of app. Looks kind of weird, but hopefully as we go on it'll make a little bit more sense. I'm going to say window.document.querySelector, and we're going to do #target. Okay, save that. Are you sure you can read that red? I can't read that red from here. Can you read the red in the back? All right, I believe you. No? You can't read it. Cool. I was not wrong. Let's find a different text theme here. Color scheme. Any suggestions of like a light one? Solarized light? Is that better? Way worse. What's the opposite of nailing it? I did that. Monokai? Let's try that. The bright or the not bright? Not bright. Yeah? Good? Cool. Okay. Switching the optimize for, I don't want to optimize, oh, scaled. There we go. 720. No, maybe? All right. Ooh, that got real big. Okay, this is a little bit more readable now, right? Yes. Okay. I got my friends over here. They're like, yeah, good job, team. Thank you. Stickers for all of you. Okay. Oh, you didn't know this, but you're all competing for stickers in my head. Okay. That got real big too. Okay. So, just to go over that again, we're requiring in the app, which we exported over here, right? And then we're rendering the app. This is just a self-closing tag. So it's basically saying, please create one instance of app, right? And then we're doing window.document.querySelector. That's all ES5 stuff, right? This is essentially a jQuery selector, essentially. Not exactly, but close enough. And we're saying, please put it on target, which is right there, right? ID equals target. That's where we're putting it. You can put document.querySelector. I just do window from force of habit. Let's see if I covered everything. So I get asked this, or at least I got asked last time I did this. Why do I not just put this in index? You can if you're not going to do server-side rendering, but because eventually we're working our way up to server-side rendering, we're going to split these up. But the short of that is, if you're going to do server-side rendering, you can't reference window anywhere inside of your app. You can only reference window inside of wherever you're doing your actual client-side specific rendering part. So that's why those are split. So should be able to save. If your Gulp watch is still working, you should be good to go. Okay, and refresh. Yes, nailed it. So how many people are seeing nailed it, or whatever hell you put there? Some of you are not as juvenile as I am. Cool. Anyone having issues, need help, questions? Yeah, success kid. Cool. So let's keep going. So let's go to, we're going to stay in the same thing here. And we're going to require a couple more things. So we're going to say var preload equals require ./Netflix, which is, if you remember correctly, is just like that JSON blob of information. And we're going to require in Lodash, which typically, if you're going to require in Lodash, I recommend just requiring the functions you need. But because this is just a workshop and, again, hashtag lazy, yeah, it's fine to just pull in the whole thing. Okay, so first thing here is we're going to put in a constructor. Notice again, no comma here. So if you're familiar with ES6 classes, a constructor is obviously a reserved word that it gets called when you instantiate a new object. This replaces getInitialState for those of you that have done React before. The getInitialState is no longer a thing in the new ES6 syntax. You just use constructor. So first things first, whenever you make a constructor in one of these ES6 classes, make sure you say super props. First line, 100% of the time, always do that. React will be most unhappy with you if you do not. Okay? Then we're going to say this dot state equals results. We're going to use the clone class on preload. Sorry, clone function, rather. Dot search. Okay? So what's happening here? We were talking about states and we were talking about props, right? The state is only available inside of that component, and it is only mutable inside of that component. This becomes a very important distinction here in just 1 second, right? Okay, and then we're using Lodash to clone preload because otherwise you get reference problems when you start trying to modify the state. Oh, and you don't want a semicolon. Cool. So let's go down to render. Okay, and we're just going to put in a little bit more markup here. So we're going to put in a div. So yeah, you can just put in like any old HTML markup. This works just fine. So you're going to say class name, which I'll explain here in a sec, app container. I would recommend that you just use my same class names, because then the CSS will just automatically work for you. Okay. Put it inside of another class name equals movies dash list. Okay. And then we're going to do some magic in here. This will be fun. Results dot map L we're going to use an arrow function. It's going to be awesome. L.title. I'll go over this in just a sec. Let me just finish typing it out. I think that gets everything. Cool. So let me just, before I start diving in, let's save, refresh, and broke it. Cool. No? The dangers of live coding. All right, well, let me explain this first, and then I'll take another look. So, a couple of things here. Class name. That should look really weird to most of you. You're mostly used to putting class, right, for CSS class names. Class is a reserved word in JavaScript. They didn't want to make it any more murky than it needs to be. And the actual name of the DOM API for changing classes is class name, believe it or not. I don't know why. So they just stuck with that. So anytime you're writing a class in React, rather, with JSX, it has to be class name. So just keep that in mind. Just get used to it. That's the way it is. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. Let's talk about these curly braces right here. This just means, by the way, JSX, I'm going to give you a JavaScript expression in here. So just watch for whatever ends up, in here. Or in other words, execute this like code, right? So you can put variables in there, and that works too. So in this particular case, we're going to do this dot state, which will correspond to this, right? This dot state dot results, and then we're calling map, which is an ES5 function. That shouldn't surprise most of you, but if it does, well, all it does is it maps over, or it loops over your entire array and runs that function on every single element in that array, and then it returns you a new array full of those new elements. Okay? Okay, this is an arrow function, which is brand new to ES6, but largely the same. I told you the point of ES6 is to no longer write function. This is another example of that. This is just a function that takes in one parameter called L, and it returns an H1 with L in it.
Capital T.
Sorry?
Capital T. Capital T on the title.
Double T on the title?
Capital.
Capital T. Thank you. Yeah. So something I should have gave you in advance is that we're using the OMDB API, which all this data also came from the OMDB API, which then I think pulls most of its data from IMDb for movies, right? So that's why they have all these like weird capitalization things. That's not a me thing. Cool. So thank you. Okay, so yeah, we're mapping over, we're returning an H1 with the title in it. So let's see what that looks like here. Awesome. Let's make this a little smaller. So what you should see is just a bunch of, essentially a list of Netflix titles, right? You all didn't know this is actually secretly an advertisement for Netflix originals. Sorry. Okay. So hopefully most of you are getting this far with me. Yeah? Yeah. Any questions? Yeah. It is still used. He asked me, is set state still being used? It is still being used, and we'll use it here in like 3 minutes. It's the same. Good question, though. Anyone else? Questions? Yeah.
If anyone else is getting an EM file error on a Mac, I just tweeted you real quick.
Okay.
There's like an one-liner. Opening so many concurrent files, it completely
Your gulp watch. Yeah, that's a good point to actually bring up. If like you're doing things and things aren't happening, whoa, that's cool. Go check your gulp because sometimes it'll open too many files. So you can just like Control C and restart it. Is there something you can do to change the gulp file to make it better?
No, but there's like view limit stroke n.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, what did you say? Okay, yeah, that's also very true. If you don't have Gulp installed after you update, yeah, let's do. I'll just put this up on here. What my friend over there, C. Alan Zappa, said is do this. If you're on a Mac, this will not work on Windows. Is anyone following along on Windows? How's it going? Good? You're a lot smarter than I am. I can't do Windows. Okay. Right? So if you're getting EM file errors, that's a good one to throw up there. Any other questions I'm missing? Nope, I don't see any. So you might have to sudo that, and I think you have to restart your terminal window as well. I might be making that up too. Yeah, cool. Thank you, by the way. Oh, sorry, I'll leave it up there. I'll just put it commented out. Cool. So hopefully most of you are seeing this now. You just got like the list. Awesome.